Okay, so we're discussing Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and a section of a book that he has, and the section is on the 7 factors of enlightenment.
Yep.
Right. Okay, that's one of my favorite topics. But I was interested in one of the things, or what you had to say about it in reference to the book. I don't try to keep up exactly with what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says on every
Okay.
topic, because he's,
Yeah.
but um, I do know that the Sambojhana is extremely important because it's in both the Anapanasati Sutta and in the Satipatthana Sutta. So anyway, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say.
Okay. So I thought it was interesting that, um, well, hmm, it's hard to phrase properly, but the mind, when needs to be uplifted, needs some kind of drive or motivation to continue the practice. And if there's not enough motivation, then I think it's the same as your analogy of standing there in front of the approaching truck,
And not
not
getting
stepping
out.
out of the way. Yeah.
Precisely so. Yes, I thought that whatever you read from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa that I would possibly have already talked about it, but there's possibly things that I would say that he didn't write down or speak about. But um, that's that fear that you're talking about that gives rise to the energy that um, when energy factor is not an enlightenment factor yet. We can look at it as kind of 2 stages. The first stage is the Eightfold Noble Path, the skills to be developed. And the Sambojhana are the enlightenment factors, or the things that we put together to finish it off. So one's an early stage, and the other one is a very late stage. And that one of the words that puts this together precisely is when it talks about unremitting mindfulness. So mindfulness is on the Eightfold Path, and the skill of the development of mindfulness or sati in the Anapanasati Sutta is for the beginner to get used to it. But in the Sambojhana, it's unremitting mindfulness, which means it keeps coming back and keeps coming back and keeps coming back, and that the student knows this. And because he knows it, he can trust it, and that this is, in fact, part of the path. The first step of the path is the knowledge that no matter how obstructed the mind gets, I can clean it out and come back. I trust that sati is coming back. It's going to come back. I may get lost, but it's going to come back. And that's an important quality, the distinction between the skill that needs to be developed, the skill of sati, and the enlightenment factor sati. That which does it is there. And that unremitting quality is also then hand in hand with the unremitting quality of investigation. That's also part of it, but we could see the investigation in the sense of investigating our views and coming through right views. And in fact, in the Sutta number 117 in the Majjhima Nikaya, the one on called the Great 40, in that sutta, the Buddha is talking about how right view is nothing but an investigation. That one's right view is to keep looking, keep investigating, keep noting, keep looking at it. And so then it becomes an enlightenment factor when it's hand in hand with the sati that's unremitting. Also, our investigation becomes unremitting. It keeps coming back and coming back to the point that we can trust that we're going to figure this stuff out. Because I keep looking, I keep watching, I keep putting pieces together, and sooner enough, we're going to have the whole puzzle all figured out. That's why it's an enlightenment factor. But the reason I'm even bringing this up is to get to that third one, and that is effort. on the path, one's right effort is a skill to be developed. And as it begins to be developed, or as it actually progresses in development, it becomes an energy. The effort is no longer effortful. It is in the beginning, but as it's developed, and that it develops through that investigation and the sati, because part of the investigation is we keep seeing dukkha. We keep seeing the crap. That phrase of "Aha, I see you, Mara," also has a tiny little fear component to it, in the sense of, wow, I'm so glad that I can see Mara, because the only other possibility is to be in it, to be the Mara, to be the suffering. And by being able to disentangle ourselves from that on a regular basis, um, uh, disassociate. A student use that word, to become disassociated with the suffering or the dukkha in the mind, by investigating it and saying, I'm not that. This is not me. This is not who I am. And by doing that, that basis of fear is actually more like a springboard. The Bhikkhu uses the word fear, but the word fear normally means in English something different. Um, and it's almost not fear, it's more like wisdom, in the sense that there's only two ways to avoid danger. One is with the gut reaction of fear, and the other one is through wisdom. Like, for instance, the coronavirus. A lot of people have the gut reaction of the fear to it because they've been around someone who's died, but there's a whole lot of people who are not in fear of corona because it hasn't touched them yet. And so they've gotten an attitude that they're okay. Or the wrong view that I mentioned, I can get away with it, is the mentality of the wrong view. But once we have knowledge of it, but there's another way. We don't have to have someone to die. We can do this through wisdom and our own compassion to recognize that, hey, there's a lot of people dying out there, and I've got a responsibility to do something about it. Okay. So in that regard, the wisdom of the knowledge of knowing coronavirus doesn't mean that it's got to kill my mother first. So it's not at that kind or level of fear. It's a fear that comes out of knowledge of suffering and no suffering. And so in that way, it's not really fear. Fear is not the right word for it. And yet we use that word a lot. Like an example, just in passing, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to tell you the truth.
Okay.
You've heard that phrase before. I'm afraid to tell you that blah, blah, right? And then we tell blah, blah because we're not really afraid. Or another way of doing exactly the same thing is, I hate to tell you that you've got bad breath, or I hate to tell you that your shoes are on backwards. And we don't hate it at all. But it does come from the point of the avoidance through wisdom of seeing that, or the wisdom of knowing that if I tell you your shoes are on backwards, you won't like that. And so that's why we use words like I hate to tell you or I'm afraid to tell you. But in fact, it's not really fear. Now that we understand that, we can understand Bhikkhu Buddhadasa when he's using the word in the sense of that the energy is based in fear. Yes, but it's not fear from a gut reaction of fear. It's based from fear of wisdom. We just know. And not only that, but this stuff leaks really deep in. It takes a while. But an example of awareness of the body and continuing to pay attention to the body tends to wake up the body in a way that it becomes an antenna for accepting data in a way that it didn't before when we weren't paying attention to the body. Now that we're beginning to pay attention to it, that paying attention to it kind of lingers. It becomes part of the modus operandi. So that within Buddhism, one of the games that is played, there's no is to play or to startle a monk is not the intention, but to wake them up. So you don't jump on someone to startle them, but it's right okay to just through walking meditation silently walk up right behind somebody, especially if they're preoccupied, like washing dishes or whatever, and you can look right over their shoulder and they look like, and here you are, you know. Now your face is 2 inches from theirs. All right. Or the game that I play with Kitty is that I could sneak up on her and take her cell phone away. And she didn't like that. She's looking at me now with a frown. I don't like it when you take my cell phone. But the whole point is to wake up. And so when she catches me and she smiles at me coming into the room, that's all right. Kitty's waking up. She is no longer stuck in that cell phone. That she's got some awareness around her. All right. So, and that awareness around us has a quality then of that right energy. We're just energized to kind of pay attention to what's happening around us. The next thing that you mentioned about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, you actually used the word joy, and I think that that's what he would do to translate the word piti. The word piti is actually the word in the suttas, but the word piti has a whole range of definitions, and so he's using it in one context, which is the way that it should be done in this. But then there's the other kind of piti that is a little more overwhelming, the stuff that happens in jhana. So this is not the piti that we're talking about. This is the jolly good nature that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has generally all the time. Why? It's unremitting joy.
I've
It's
listened to
joyful all the
talks.
time.
Yeah,
Pardon?
I've listened to talks of Buddhadasa in Thai, and like midway through his sentence, he'll just go, you know, he'll just like he'll let out like a laugh like halfway through a sentence and then continue.
Yes, he didn't.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't even recognize that until I mention it. But because I don't speak Thai very well and my hearing is not good, which is the main problem, I spent a lot of time trying to learn Thai and kind of gave up on it because I can't hear the Thai when they're talking. But I could tell enough by listening to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa that he was actually chuckling and laughing his way right through every talk he gave. There's that unremitting joy, that little bit of happiness that kind of sinks deep in, and it's there. Okay, unremitting joy. Now, here's another quality of the 7 factors of enlightenment, and that is the order that they're in. That, in fact, they are in the correct order intentionally. Whereas in the Anapanasati Sutta itself, the Anapanasati sequence is not in chronological order intentionally. That this is where the chronological order comes in. And the reason for that is because it's sati that has to be developed first. And that's the primary skill that needs to be developed. Every time that I tell the students that sati comes number 1, it's the first skill to be developed, is because unlike in the Eightfold Noble Path, where it's got various places around depending upon which order it is, in the Sambojhana, sati is the first item on the list. You've got to have the unremitting mindfulness as the first quality that we want to develop. That's why sati is so important. Without it, if you can't remember to be happy, how can you be happy? It's as simple as that. That's the first thing we have to do is wakey, wake up, keep waking up. And so here's also a point where it's the chronological order is important, and that is the next item on the list. And that is after unremitting piti, actually after unremitting joy, is where it has unremitting relaxation. In other words, without the joy, we're not ever really going to get relaxed. But one thing that does relax, in fact, that's one of the reasons why people like to go see comedians, is because their laughter helps relax them and they feel good. And so this is a natural occurrence. So if we can develop unremitting joy, then we can also develop unremitting relaxation. And yet that point about relaxing, especially relaxing the body, which is often wrong translated as tranquilizing the body, is like we're going to go get a tranquilizing gun and a dart and shoot ourselves in the foot or something and then pass out. And in fact, it's a very dangerous time when an animal in the wild is shot for tranquilizing, because it's hard to tell how much is the right stuff. You give him too much, it'll kill him. You don't give him enough, he'll wake up while you're still putting the collar on him. And so, but the whole point of tranquilization is that you're out of it. This is not that kind of out of it. This is more like the relaxation that they try to present us with in martial arts movies of the old master. That's really relaxed. In other words, when two black belts get together in a battle, they dance around each other, they'll kick, they'll move, they'll do all of their things. And an old master, when he comes up against somebody like that that's doing a little bit of showing off, he's just standing there. He's not going to do anything until the guy strikes him. And when he does, he's going to know it, and he's going to grab the guy, throw him to the ground, and then he's relaxed again. So there's that tension of not being ready for anything in particular, but being ready for whatever happens joyfully. That's real relaxation. Now, the danger for people who are reading the suttas wrong is that this relaxation has a major body component, to the point that step 4 of Anapanasati is the relaxation of the body that they call tranquilizing. And a lot of people get the idea of what that means is they have to sit still for long periods of time. You have to sit very still for an hour or 2 hours, instead of recognizing, no, really what happens is that someone can sit for an hour or 2 hours relaxed because he was training in relaxation. He wasn't training in rigid sitting. It's really hard when you're really intent on sitting for an hour without moving to be relaxed. But you can't. But it takes a change of attitude. So real relaxation only comes after joy, and unremitting relaxation only comes after unremitting joy. And unremitting joy doesn't come until things are really easy to do. It's very energetic now. In the old days, it used to take some effort, but now we've got all of that taken care of. And so this is how this 7 factors of enlightenment put together. And I wish I had gotten more from you from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa rather than giving you this version of it. But you could probably take what I'm saying and put it right in there, knowing that we've only covered 5 of the 7.
Well, I wrote it down as a footnote. It might not have been a footnote in the book, but he said, he listed the factors, the ones that are to uplift the mind, and the ones which are not to calm the mind. And
they are, after, by the way, they're both the same thing. It's just 2 different ways of looking at it. You're not going to get a calm mind unless you can uplift it.
The same as the
minds don't get calm in the gut.
Pinwheel on the fence thing, right?
Say again?
The same thing that you mentioned before with the pinwheel on the fence. Which way is it turning depends on.
All right. What the
Yeah.
left swastika or right swastika depends
Yeah.
upon your.
Yeah. Well, he mentioned that if the mind is neutral, so if it's lacking energy or if it's neutral, then you should also uplift it. So there's that joy component that you need that joy before you can actually calm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That would be a question that I was asked. What did he make that point that joy precedes the calm?
Yeah,
And yet, a
yeah.
lot of people try to get calm first because that's the order of Anapanasati, with body being first. And so they work really hard to get calm, but they don't have the joy component that's needed in the higher steps of Anapanasati, like
Yeah.
gladdening the mind and sukha and actual piti. These are steps. Step 5, 6, and 10 are the ones that I just mentioned. And there they are then as they're fully developed. See, in the Anapanasati Sutra itself, it says these are things to be trained.
Mm.
But in the Sambojhana, these are factors that have been trained to the point of unremitting. Not there all the time, just keeps coming back and keeps coming back and keeps coming back. That's the part. So instead of trying to be calm all the time, just be able to get calm whenever you think you want to get calm. Just think, all calm. Because the only other possibility was, darn, I haven't been calm all of that time. I could have been calm enough.
I went to a group meditation, one time in the city, and I think there was a divide in the room between people saying, "Oh, the traffic was very noisy." One half of the room, after everybody could share their thoughts if wanted to, it's like, I wanted to relax, but there was so much noise outside. Then the other half was, oh, I thought the noise was quite nice,
Same noise, same room.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's merely a frame of mind. That's merely a frame of mind. You can either ignore the noise or incorporate the noise into part of the practice, or you can hate it. And a lot of people hate it, especially if a meditator coughs. Some people will just bounce. Ah! Yeah, there's a lot of kind of annoyances that are around that many meditation halls will try to do something about. One of them, for instance, here in South Thailand, is they don't want mosquito coils in the meditation hall, that you got to put on some kind of lotion or whatever to keep the mosquitoes off. Or you can practice mosquito meditation.
I've done that before.
So, what else do you remember from the talk or the part that you got from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa?
Well, I wrote all the key points down just so I could maybe internalize it. Let's see. I liked his analogies of mindfulness, the role of that factor as being a gardener in a huge garden with many kinds of flowers, and knowing the right kinds of flowers to pick that are the good flowers. Because you could be there. During my time with the Mahasi methods and on retreat, I'd stop for everything. Even if it was something so insignificant like that was completely neutral, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it gets to a point where you're not paying attention to the right thing, whereas you're paying attention to the sound, but you're not paying attention to the aversion of being drawn out of meditation by the sounds.
So,
yeah. So there's the right thing, and there's the skillful thing, and the less skillful thing.
the real point, the really important point there is the hindrances, in the sense that be on guard for hindrances. Learn to recognize them so that we can throw them out. And one of the ways that we can the beginning easy way to recognize the hindrances is if we're not watching the breath. If we've forgotten so much about what's going on that we're not even watching the breath anymore, then we certainly have lost sati. So the first thing we recognize is, am I watching my breath or not? Or another way of looking at it is, let's take a deep breath right now. Let's do it. So that taking of that deep breath is the part of the wake up, and is also part of one's right effort. So that later, when this stuff becomes unremitting, which is, and when we talk about unremitting in English, in another way we'd look at it is things get really deep, or things go right to the core. When mindfulness goes right down to the core, when it's there for you as part of your being, or sati and the other parts, then it's really useful. Not that you're not going to have any more hindrances, but that you're going to be kind of on guard naturally to keep the hindrances away. But that's a skill that has to be developed, is to recognize that, oh, this is hindrance. Wherever you're going, whatever you're doing, you kind of make a tab. Is this worth having? Is this thought worth having? And that's the analogy that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is talking about, is, the gardener that's tending a huge, huge garden. What garden? Garden of the mind. This full of flowers. What are the flowers? They're thoughts. And that we can be the gardener in that place. And we learn through wisdom, through our experience, of which things are worth having in the garden and which are weeds to be thrown out. And those are the hindrances. And we get really good at doing that. So that it becomes part of the furniture of the mind, so to speak. That's what we mean by right energy. Unremitting energy. We keep doing it and we keep doing it. We're used to watching what's going on. So I like that analogy. The gardener. What else did you get?
That was the most poetic thing in that chapter. But I guess, I don't know, maybe I should ask this. When I was on retreat and there's all these teachers there from all around the world, they kind of, and I know this is like the hardcore Burmese style of meditation, where they said, don't worry about everything else, just focus on the sati. Because they told me, if you focus on the sati and the sati alone, it will raise the other path factors along with it. Do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, they're playing a game in a way with words. Say it again. What about sati?
They said that if you like put all of your attention,
okay, all
quite
right,
a lot of
that's
determination.
It. That's it.
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
You got it. Okay, if you put all of your data into sati, means sati and his friends that we're actually naming. In other words, if you're going to have sati and you're going to develop only sati without any right effort, then what's sati? Then you're just going to stand in the road and let all of these thoughts run right over you.
So it's basically saying, okay, it'll naturally follow because you're not gonna let yourself get run over within the right environment.
If you know what you're doing. It's almost like this way, because I see this happening within, is that there is a progress of experience that one goes through because they've heard the very classical instructions. And then when they get that, then they say, you know, all it is just this, just blah, blah. This is all there is to it. Just focus your attention on sati and you've got it. Well, yes, but he's coming from a place that's already there in that regard. Another one would be one that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, with loving laughter, pulled on me when I sprang the English expression about meditation. If at first you don't succeed, try again. And he hits me with, if at first you don't succeed, look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
All right, so that's that. But if you first don't succeed, look at what you're doing. Is in fact the entire process of the practice. Just like the Buddha was able to get it right down to just one thing, both formally and now I teach only one thing: dukkha, nirodha. But that's like I'm only delivering you one container cart. And you've got to unpack this thing and put it back together again, and then you'll find out it's just one thing. Sort of like the idea of a clock. A clock is just one thing when all of the pieces and parts of it are put together and are functioning in harmony. Or we think of the car as just one thing, where in fact, no, a car is not one thing. It's just all kinds of stuff in it. Got transmissions and motors, and even the motor has pistons and cylinders and spark plugs, and it just goes on and on and on. But a good automobile mechanic knows what all the components are in a car. But when the car comes back together, it's just one thing. The Dhamma is just one thing. It's just dukkha, nirodha. That's all there is to it. But we can't deliver it that way. That if I told you that and that's the only thing that I ever told you, you wouldn't learn very much. So I've got to unpack it for you. And so when someone makes a statement like that, like all you have to do is pay full attention to sati and that's all there is to it. Someone said that to a student who was knowledgeable and understood what it means. He then repeats that to another student who doesn't have a clue. And now it's a cliche. And so that's how it gets spread, is kind of a cliche. But it's better to let's break that thing down and figure out how that's true. The answer is yes, it is true, but it's not true in the way that we would practice, that we actually have to work at right effort. It takes effort to bring these jhana factors together. But after we get used to it, just like any skill that you've learned, one of them that I learned about very young, which is an important, was how to use a sewing machine. My mom made clothes. She knew how to use a sewing machine. But when I began to try to use the sewing machine, here you got bunched up threads, you've got broken needles, you've got fingers with needle holes in them, you've got all kinds of stuff going on for the beginner. But we eventually pick up and learn the skill. So much so, in fact, that mom can have a conversation or even scold the children while she's still sewing away. So this is the kind of skill development that we want to have, is to develop these things as skills independently. Because if we don't, for instance, know the path factor of right attitude, how can one actually then develop a right attitude? That attitude actually comes with the joy. that we have to have that joy because that joy gives us the feeling of success. And success gives us a feeling of joy. In fact, joy and success are really interrelated, even to the point that I get the joke. Because if somebody tells a joke and everybody around is laughing and you don't get the joke, now you're confused. And they can explain it, but then it's not funny when it's explained. It's only funny when, I got it. And so this is the same thing, then, is success, which is also wrapped up with pity and joy. And this is our attitude. Because most people, they start off with an attitude of a loser. The attitude of being unhappy or living a life that we talk about as being a reptilian-brained life that is based upon survival and fear and longing and wanting and hoping versus, and we get into that as a habit. It becomes unremitting misery, unremitting dukkha. And we want actually at that level of, when it says unremitting pity, we're also talking about it in the sense of unremitting sukha. To keep on coming back to the point that everything is okay. This is sabai. We've got it. This is it. That's the value of the Sambojhana, is that it is an expression of the factors after they've been fully developed. So what else have we got?
Well, I think you already said it, although I didn't write it down. He said that, now I'm paraphrasing, that only a certain amount of effort actually has to be put in before it's, kind of, it just goes on its own naturally, takes its own course.
Well, you know where I got all my material.
Yeah.
Even though I haven't been in it with him for 30 years, it's fairly stable. Not much has changed in the past 500 years, in fact. That's why it's called noble.
Yeah.
Noble truth, because these things survive politicians and governments and things like that. That this is the way that the human mind works. And I suppose that nobility will last as long as there's human beings. As long as there's someone to wake up, someone will. All right, so you have any other points about this? I really like this topic. This is one of my favorite points, is Sambojhana. I've even been requested by Achan Po to give talks on this.
Oh, wow. I don't know, not much comes to mind. Other than maybe when to, I don't know, maybe it's just a feeling thing, but when to know to kind of add in a little bit more sati and then a little bit more. I usually get up to a point where the concentration seems very, very smooth and it's quite enjoyable. But then I won't really pay attention to a hindrance that arises. I get snagged along, and then I return. My usual thing to do is to take a deep breath from that, because the breathing's usually calmed down quite substantially.
It naturally does if we're not watching it.
Yeah.
That's why it's valuable on the in-breath to know that it's a long in-breath, and on the out-breath to know that it's a long out-breath. That's right there in the sutta, like that. So that you know or understand that this is a long out-breath. and to understand and know that this is a long in-breath. And we practice that way, which actually, if you look at it, that means that within every breath, there are 2 points of sati. And we remind ourselves, this is a deep in-breath. And we remind ourselves, this is a deep out-breath. And then the whole rest of that breath is time to do other things associated with anapanasati. But we generally check in twice each breath. Even if the breath gets very long duration, it's still, here's an example of counting to 8 on the in-breath, about 1 count per second, and then count to 8 on the out-breath.
I've been doing 5.
Okay.
But usually I just kind of, if it's a big breath, it would be more like, adaptive, like 1, 2, just adapting to how it feels at the time rather than changing the number.
Okay. Well, here's part of that normally we can fill up on 5 or 6, and so then the 7 and 8 at the end of the in-breath is just the end of the in-breath. To where on the out-breath, after it goes out and we're counted to 8, now we leave it out for another count of 4. If you practice that way, this means that you're actually taking 20 seconds per breath. This is down to 3 breaths a minute. This is really slow compared to the 20 breaths a minute, and yet we're still doing it with long, deep in and out breathing. And this really helps focus the mind. But the important thing is that this is really pleasurable. And part of the pleasure is knowing that you can do this. And so that's one of the ways of practice, is allowing yourself to have really deep breath, but it's a really long, deep breath, about 8 seconds, and then a long out breath, followed by an intermediate time when there's no in and out breathing. That's the time when that between the out and the new in breath is the time when the mind can, in fact, come to a complete rest. And we'll talk more about what that means, because we need to get first jhana well developed before we get into second jhana.
Okay.
But this is a way to practice it, is to get, and not only that, but by doing this counting, now we're really focusing the mind down. We've already been working on the part about keeping the mind only on wholesome thoughts, right? Then we've talked about keeping the mind focused only on the here now. Well, now if we can get the mind down into one little stall called 1 to 8, 1 to 8, 1 to 4, 1 to 8, 1 to 8, 1 to 4, over and over again, the mind is really getting settled down now. And if other thoughts come in, be sure that you note those. But don't let it take you away from the counting. So counting the breaths has a lot of value, but a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to count 1 per each in breath. No, that's not the way that we do it. Okay, counting up to 8, which is 8 in and out breaths. No, we're going to actually count like a metronome or like a clock. Tick, 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 tick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3. Okay, like that. Except not a quick in breath like I took to count, but you know, the in and the out breath. So this is one of the ways of really getting the mind settled down. But we need to get the mind settled into just wholesome and unwholesome will be good enough of a first jhana to live your life, so that you keep out of the gutter. That's all the sati you need, is to make sure that your mind is in a wholesome state, every thought. Some people say, oh, is that all there is to it? And others will say, oh my God, I couldn't do that.
Well, isn't the act of recognizing an unwholesome thought as an unwholesome thought a wholesome thought. Should I repeat that? Isn't recognizing an unwholesome thought as unwholesome a wholesome thought?
Recognizing an unwholesome thought is wholesome.
Mm.
That's in fact, aha, I see you, Mara. It would be that thought, that wholesome thought. Once we see the Mara itself is the unwholesome thought, and aha, I see you, Mara, then is the wholesome thought. Yes, absolutely correct. That is in fact a wholesome thought. Aha, I see you, Mara. It fits right in Dhanapanasati step 10 of gladdening the mind. And it also has the quality of disjointing us or separating us from or becoming disassociated with that self, that Mara, that thought system that we were in. Aha, I see you, bad thought. Now we're no longer the bad thought. While we were having the bad thought and didn't know it and didn't wake up to it, now we are the bad thought. But by waking up, we disassociate from that. Now I am not the bad thought. That's just Mara. Aha, I see you, Mara. And that's exactly the way that the Buddha put together his path. This is a famous point on that he talks about. I forget exactly where it is in the suttas, where he recognizes how the mind functions. That dukkha is caused by unwholesome thoughts. That's the hindrances. That's where the word hindrance comes from. Panchanavana, or whatever. So that's the way of looking at it. You're right. Absolutely right. How do you handle a bad thought is with a good thought. They say that about guns in the United States. The only way to handle a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. All right. Well, I don't believe that in that case, but in this case, yeah, we can work with that. How do you handle a bad thought is with a good thought, not more bad thoughts, which happens most of the time in the beginning for every student. And the bad thought that we'd have after a bad thought would be, oh no, there I go again. Oh, this stuff is so hard. I'm a terrible meditator. I need a real teacher. You know, that kind of thought. Those are all one bad thought after another after another. But there was a little spark of wisdom. There was a little spark of sati, but it wasn't enough to get the effort going to come out of it. But having a good thought after a bad thought took some effort, right effort. So if you don't mind, we'll finish it off. We did talk about 5 of them. If you want all 7, we can go ahead and do that. There's 7 of the Sambojhana.
Yeah. Well, I'm not really sure how difficult it will be. I don't know. I feel like with the equanimity, it'll just arise naturally.
After the joy.
Yeah, and
after the tranquility. But there's something to say about equanimity. If you're on a train, and in Thailand sometimes you're on a train, and that there are another one is a boat. There's a thing that sailors have. They call it sea legs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, landlubbers, when they first get on the boat, they're really, really unstable. Why is that? Because they're fighting with the boat as it moves and rocks up and down. They're used to solid ground. Okay, so equanimity in this regard is not that you get so passive and so settled that you become rock hard, but it's more gaining sea legs for the mind. So that now, whatever happens on the outside of the world, you can keep yourself balanced. And I like that analogy of the sea legs because it really fits with this whole idea. A lot of people think that it doesn't, uh, uh, that equanimity, um, in fact, turns a meditator into being a zombie. But real equanimity is having sea legs for the vicissitudes of life. And the Pali word for that is upekkha. And we can think of it as balance. There's many places that we can see that, but basically, we often use balancing techniques to handle fragile goods. An example of that, the old cowboy movie that's got a boxcar that they're transporting nitroglycerin or some powerful explosion. Or wine bottles is another way of doing it. How do you transport wine bottles in a train that's going, you know, clickety clack down the road? The answer is that you suspend the bottle or suspend the container of nitroglycerin, so as the boat or the the train rocks back and forth, the bottle will swing naturally, but it's not rigid. Imagine also that if you're trying to hold yourself. In fact, I think we talked about this the last time on the Samlor. This is how can you be equanimity on the Samlor?
Samlo?
Didn't we talk about no, not Sam Lord, Song Tao.
Oh
Sorry,
yeah.
not a
Yeah,
three wheel, not a tuk tuk, but a Song Tao, the two seater. This is an example then of equanimity, of being able to ride in the back of a Song Tao and go with the flow and know what's happening. You know how to brace yourself. You make it really easy as opposed to getting thrown around. So in a way, you can see that the Thai people have developed that skill. The Thai people just crowd onto a song towel like you wouldn't believe. You've seen them hanging out the back, but they get used to doing it. They develop their bodily equanimity to do that. They get their sea legs, or in this case, song towel legs. And that's the best way that I can describe it, is this quality of being at one with the environment. So as the environment swings back and forth, we can go with the flow rather than getting bumped around by it. Many different ways we can look at it. Let's say that you've got a dance troupe and they lose one of their dancers and they have to train a new recruit. And that new recruit, she may be a good dancer, but she doesn't know these dance routines or dance steps. And so she's going to make a lot of mistakes trying to look at what the others are doing and repeating it. And by doing that, she's always slow. But if she keeps rehearsing, then she'll be able to do it with equanimity, which means she's fitting exactly right in with the dance troupe. She knows the moves. This is basically what we're meaning by equanimity. It's a form of wisdom that we call going with the flow.
I'm gonna have to check my phone to see if I'm required.
I can't hear you. Your microphone's very weak
sorry.
now.
I have to check my phone to see if I'm required for a meeting.
It's still very weak. You must have gotten a different microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you better back.
Okay, no problem. It doesn't matter. I just checked it. It's okay. But I did have a thought yesterday, and I thought maybe you'd know a bit about it. You can hear me?
It's hard.
Oh,
But
tap.
yeah, I hear the tapping.
Okay, how about now?
It's about the same.
Oh, tilt it. How about now?
I can hear you, but it's quite weak, not as opposed to how it was a few minutes ago.
I'll move it a bit closer.
That's good right there.
Okay, well, I was thinking about I don't know much about it, but you might, with your engineering background, right? The concept of interference.
Right. We can use that concept with radio in the sense of signal to noise ratio.
Mm.
Okay, so equanimity would be able to handle it with a lot of noise. An example of that would be sonar operators in a submarine. They begin to learn to listen to how those pings sound. Okay, so it's an education that we have. So that signal to noise ratio, yes, that's a good analogy, or what you're calling interference. In fact, that's a major issue with all of computer science. Even in statistics, that's why they have a measure of error. That's the noise. There's signal in there someplace, but there's always a lot of crap that comes along with it. How good we are filtering the crap. The answer is we get really good at filtering out the crap. All right, so that's equanimity, is the ability to manage the incoming and to filter out that which is signal, and we can dispense of the noise. So in fact, you can think of, but that's what we're doing all along. That's what the hindrances are, except that right now, in the beginning of one's practice, it's almost all noise, no signal. So we begin to keep with sati, keep coming back to sati, keep remembering, keep looking, keep throwing the dukkha, keep throwing the noise out. And pretty soon we begin to hear the music that's underlying the actual signal of the universe that's going on. So that's a really good analogy. I like that.
I once thought there was something worth looking into. I think it was called Bayesian probability or something.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with Bayesian theory.
Yeah, I gave up. I'm not in a STEM background really, but I read about it and I thought, wow, that's something I've thought about before.
Yeah. In fact, that's what a lot of Bayesian theories and whatnot, especially in regard to computers, is learning how to figure out what the noise is and what's the real signal. That's actually going to be an important part for AI as it progresses, is for the machines to get smart enough, because they have to be able to understand the signal input that's coming in, including all of the noise. Okay, so we can say then that's the equanimity. Or another way of saying it, can the sailor become at one with the ship?
That's what I was thinking about before. Well, you mentioned it in the Songtao one, brother. Becoming a part of the Songtao. I think you mentioned
Becoming
last
part
time.
of
Yeah.
the Sangha, precisely, exactly so.
And you said knowing the territory as well.
Knowing the territory.
So yeah, I'm not really 100% sure on how it works, but how I imagine it is a crossing of some kind of thresholds, and then gradually just
Yeah, well, taking it from the perspective of it that it's a training. And part of the way of looking at the training is to train the mind so that it can see the distinction between signal and noise. And then we get better at it. The first thing we got to do is to even distinguish between what's signal and what's noise. And that very first distinguishment is, okay, young meditator dude, sit there and watch your breath. See if you can do it. And the answer is no, he can't. The mind's going to wander away. He goes right back into the noise again. Okay, if now you're in noise, come out of the noise and come back to signal. And we keep practicing that over and over again until we begin to recognize that, wait a minute, this mind is pretty noisy. Not a lot of signal going on. But now we can see it. We can accept it because we know it. That we recognize that human beings spend a lot of time in noise and not a lot of signal processing. So this is equanimity, is being able to go with the flow, having sea legs, that is not a rigid posture. A lot of people think of equanimity or equipose in the sense that they're sitting in a particular posture or pose all the time. No, don't do that on board of a ship in a storm. In fact, you won't be able to. All right, so the next one, then, the last one on the list is samadhi. And we recognize that unremitting samadhi means that we now have a mind that is unified, unremitting. We keep coming back to a state of unity, that we're not scattered. We don't tend to lie. That in fact, when the mind is unified, our sila is perfect. We teach sila to children because it's too hard to teach wisdom to a child. We can't tell a child, look at what you're doing, and expect him to do that. No, you set out a bunch of rules. Thou shalt put down that cell phone. It's time to go to sleep. Kind of things. And so that just happened last night, by the way. And so there are rules that we give children that, if you look at it in this way, that set of rules that someone gave some child somewhere deep in the past was the beginning of our society. And that we've done nothing with society since then other than adding new rules. And so our society is full of rules, many of which cause suffering and many of which were designed to eliminate suffering and don't do a very good job of it. But things in general are better than chaos, where everybody thinks that they can do anything they want to, harm anybody they want to, and get away with it. That's wrong view. But right view then is, oh, you got to follow the rules. But that's not noble right view. That's just ordinary right view. A super mundane or noble right view is, look at what you're doing. And in that regard, we're talking about signal to noise ratio. So now we're back to this quality of, when the mind is unified, the sila becomes quite good. If you're already in a state to where you don't need anything, then the likelihood of you going shopping is very low. And if you're not likely to go shopping, then the likelihood of you going shoplifting is extremely low. For the kids, we've got to set rules. No shoplifting. Why? Because they like and they want everything they see. But the Dhamma dude can like it, but he doesn't want it. He's already unified. He's already whole. He's already got everything. He's already satisfied. And when we can get into that state unremittingly, then what is there left? That's it. That's the completion of the path. But this unification of mind, of this right noble sati that's mentioned in the Eightfold Noble Path, is the outcome of that, is this unremitting samadhi, this unremitting unification of mind. Now, mostly when people hear it, they use the word samadhi and they substitute the English word concentration. But we're not talking about a mind that's too focused or too concentrating on something, but rather that he's kind of paying attention to everything. An example would be, it's not a telephoto lens that is samadhi, that's concentration. That samadhi is a fisheye lens, or maybe a 360-degree lens. Broader perspective. So when we talk about a unified mind, we're talking about one that's integrated, kind of like a camera. If a camera is shaky, you're not going to get a good image. But if the mind is firm and stable, then you can see things really well. In fact, that instability of the receiver is part of the noise. But when the receiver itself, the camera, is very, very stable, then it's much more likely to get a fairly good image of what's really out there. And so this is the quality of the unified mind, is that now we can see the noise is low. And this is where these factors then gather together in samadhi for that unification of mind. So unremitting unification of mind is in fact then that point that we jump off to the end. In other words, we're practicing anapanasati for the fulfillment of the satipatthana with all the little pieces, body, feeling, mind, and anapanasati. So we get all of that stress straightened out. And we practice the Sambojhana for the fulfillment of the 7 factors of enlightenment. But now we're fulfilling or practicing and gaining the unremitting mindfulness, etc., of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And we do that why? For the fulfillment of the purpose of knowledge and deliverance. And this is in the Anapanasati Sutta. Right after the Sambojhana, it comes knowledge and deliverance. What is the knowledge? The knowledge is the signal. We can hear it now. And what is the deliverance? Well, if the knowledge or the signal is incoming, then we need to move the boat. We need to get it out of the way. Hard right or whatever, left flank. So in that regard, that's the deliverance from danger that we can see clearly because we're able to discern the distinction between signal and noise.
I'm sure this analogy has been used before, but kind of like a more extreme version would be rally car racing, right? The guy who sits next to the driver who's giving him the very has to be rapid fire instructions on when to turn and how hard the turn's going to be. Yeah, is it?
Yeah, the navigator.
Yeah, the navigator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ships have navigators. Airplanes have navigators.
Sure.
Drivers have navigators. Exactly right. And they've got to watch what's going on to where the driver is more intense on the immediate instant. The navigator is really looking at where you're going. And so both of those functions are hard for one human being to do in the situation. But in normal life, you can do both. You can be both your navigator and your driver. But that's a pretty good analogy, right?
Yeah, I mean it's okay. I think the boat thing might be better because of the slow and easy thing.
Yeah, that's the important thing is that in our case, we're not trying to win a rally. We're not trying to win anything. Yeah. We're just enjoying the drive.
I think Buddhadasa did use a sailboat analogy for one of these descriptions, and it might have even been to do with equanimity. I'm not sure. No, I think it was the knowing when to uplift and when to calm the mind, when to use the first 3 factors or the last 3 factors. And one analogy was if there's a wind and you don't raise the sails, it's not going to go anywhere. But if there's a storm and you raise the sails,
and it'll destroy the mast. Yeah, right, yeah. Exactly. So you got to know when to put up the sails. Or another way of looking at it is when to let go. Well, that when is the signal to noise ratio. We got to figure out what's the signal here. The right signal is going to tell us to raise the sails, and or the noise will tell us, oh, you need to lower the sails even though you've got a nice breeze. So these analogies really do help for students to begin to understand that this is kind of a a balancing act.
Yeah.
And that balancing act then is the very definition of equanimity. It's a balancing act. You learn to juggle. And one of the ways we learn to juggle is by putting down the things that are not worth holding. So that the things that we are juggling are easy to juggle. And maybe we can get it down to just to one ball, and then we're just doing this. And then we can put that ball down too, and now the juggling has nothing to it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. I've enjoyed this, and
Yeah, me
I
too.
appreciate your input from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. But you can see that you know. Let's put it this way: anything that he says that I disagree with, let's go with what he says.
Okay.
But anything that I say generally will fit right into what he's saying.
Yeah. Okay then. I have to go somewhere. Well, not too soon, but kind of soon.
All
So
right.
yeah.
Well, we'll see you later.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Have fun.
Yeah. See you next time.
Stay balanced.
Will do.